I don't know if there has ever been a movie with higher expectations than The Odyssey, and there's a reason for that, starting with the fact that it's one of the oldest stories in Western civilization. I mean, it was originally written in the late 8th or early 7th century BCE. It is a classic story that is truly timeless. And while there are plenty of examples of stories paying homage to the Odyssey, there aren't really a lot of examples of pure adaptations of Homer's epic, which feels kind of weird to say when there are people out there who will complain that there were never any original ideas anymore. And part of the reason for that is because some of the most notable examples of adaptations for the Odyssey haven't really been able to live up to the story. You know, you can look at Ulysses starring Kirk Douglas, and it has great visual effects considering it was made in 1954, but the problem with it more so is that it's an abbreviated telling of the story. You know, it has to be less than 2 hours. That's kind of what Lord of the Rings changed for movie theater experiences. It proved that people would be willing to sit in a theater for almost 3 hours, and you kind of have to have this be a long runtime to be able to do the full story justice. And while it wasn't a movie, Francis Ford Coppola, who directed the Godfather movies, did produce a mini-series adaptation of the Odyssey in the late 90s, and while again, it was very visually impressive, and Francis Ford Coppola is obviously one of the greatest directors of all time, it is still a TV show's budget. You know, there are certain limitations that are put onto it, and because he chose to have the visual effects be more impressive, it meant that the action was more limited. And if Francis Ford Coppola isn't able to make an adaptation that is truly worthy of this story, then that's going to scare off a lot of directors from trying to do it again. But we've got Christopher Nolan here, and while I think he is the one director that most of us would have picked to make this movie, that does also raise the expectations even higher because we expect greatness from Nolan. He's got a lot of great movies, so that's also going to raise the expectations here. So does this live up to the hype? Odds are you've either seen the movie or this isn't your first review, so you know the answer to that question. And, you know, if this is your first review, I'm honored, but come on, I know what my channel is. So now that we got the background out of the way, let's dive on deep into this movie and start with what I think is the most important part of any movie, the tone, because this one has a lot to do because of its source material. You know, sometimes this is an action movie, sometimes it's a romantic movie, sometimes it's a family drama, and sometimes it is straight up a horror movie. If the tone is not done right, I don't care how great the cast is, that is too big of a hurdle to overcome. And this is where Nolan is able to play to his strengths, because he has made non-linear stories before. Obviously, Tenet and Oppenheimer are some of the more recent examples, and while those two can sometimes struggle because of reasons outside of the actual tone of the movie, you know, with Tenet, the rules can be confusing at times. With Oppenheimer, you don't always have the emotion hit the same way that it needs to. I mean, obviously the Trinity scene stands alone, but, you know, as far as Oppenheimer as a character goes, it's more limited because it's not as emotional. You know, with Odysseus, we don't have that same limit here, so as he's learning about how his own decisions led to the death of his crew, we're seeing just how hard it hits him, and we learn alongside him what happens, as at the same time, his son Telemachus has his own hero's journey where he's still young enough to think, oh, my father is what Ithaca needs. I will find my father to save Ithaca, and on his journey, he learns what Ithaca actually needs. So while the story does jump around a lot, it does all come together at the right times and leads to a very satisfying conclusion, and part of the reason for that is because of Matt Damon's performance. He really does an amazing job of selling just how much it affects Odysseus to learn what has happened to his crew and how his own decisions led to their deaths, and that's kind of just what keeps the story centered. You know, Odysseus is a character who every decision he makes, he wants to do what is best for Greece, he wants to do what's best for his men, he wants to return home, and even when he doesn't want to return home, it's because he feels he is no longer worthy to. And I want to talk more about Odysseus because, well, one, he's the main character, so that's a pretty big deal, and two, I've already mentioned Oppenheimer, and I want to start with that because the parallels are pretty obvious between the two characters, as Odysseus is the one who comes up with the idea that they should hide in the horse to gain access to the city and end the Trojan War. And it does work, but the problem is it violates the spirit of Zeus's law, that you treat strangers with respect as if they are hidden gods, and you give them food and shelter and you accept their gifts. That's why Odysseus thinks this will work, and it does. It's just that he believes that in doing so that he has destroyed men.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
And just like Oppenheimer, he blames himself for the nature of men. He gives them a tool to destroy each other, but they were already on a path to destroy each other. And while yes, the gods would agree that the Greeks are no longer obeying the spirit of Zeus's law, at the same time, they wouldn't think that just because of Odysseus. Because the whole movie, we're told about how Greece has to have this fear for the sea people, that they need a king so that they can raise an army to fight back against them. But the thing is, the sea people are the veterans of the Trojan War who are going around pillaging and plundering under the guise of, hey, we are entitled to these things because we need them. Zeus's law demands that you give them to us. And even if the Greeks want to try to hide by saying, oh, that's our veterans, but they were destroyed by hatred and war, that's not a true reflection of Greece. The problem with that, though, is that we see from Penelope's suitors that Zeus's law has been all but destroyed, because they feel entitled to their banquets at the castle. They feel entitled to Penelope herself, even, that she just needs to forget about Odysseus and pick a new husband so they can be king. And meanwhile, while this is happening, they're trying to get rid of their biggest threat to the throne by goading Telemachus into fighting one of them so that they can kill him also.
I know! Imagine the nads on those guys who did this in a wagon! Pioneers, Brian! We share their spirit! Manifest destiny!
And this all comes back to Odysseus' story because while he believes he is the one who's destroyed Zeus's law and broken men, and while his crew believes that he is cursed by the gods for attacking Poseidon's son, the Cyclops, the gods actually let him live because he realizes that Zeus's law is no longer being followed, and he realizes just how important it is for men to follow it. And his story culminates in him protecting his son and returning home as a beggar, reminding Ithaca why Zeus's law needs to be followed as he becomes the stranger who is mistreated, who then shows who he really is, punishing those who would feel entitled to the kingdom and reminding all of Greece why Zeus's law needs to be followed. And while I think the action is fantastic in this scene, I do understand why some people would have problems with it because there are a lot of quick cuts. It can feel kind of like the action in the Dark Knight trilogy, actually, which got better as the movies went on, but again, I know people have problems with the quick cuts, but I think scenes like this one are the reason why you have them, because it is just showing the pure chaos of the scene as one man has to go against literal scores of them. Though in some ways I was also kind of reminded of The Prestige with how Odysseus and Penelope were able to come up with this plan together where Odysseus is simultaneously confessing his sins to Penelope and feeling that he isn't worthy of coming home, and Penelope is just telling him how much she still loves him, and really it's this beautiful scene that I think is one of the best that Nolan has ever done. Like, to me, it's Odysseus and Penelope talking on other sides of the screen, it's the Trinity scene, and it's Batman and Joker in the interrogation room. Those are his best scenes by far, in my opinion, and part of the reason why I thought The Prestige also is because they've been setting up the bow the whole movie, and really it's just a great payoff and shows the intimacy and love and trust that Odysseus and Penelope have as they're able to come up with this plan to deal with the suitors that simultaneously ends a lot of their plans to become king, protects Telemachus, and ends with the suitors that survive bowing to Odysseus. But Odysseus is a changed man now. He doesn't end the story as king because he respects Zeus's laws, so he has to put himself into exile to punish himself for what he has done. And in doing so, he leaves Telemachus to be king, which is the right choice because he has been the one who has been respecting and following Zeus's law this whole time, not just taking what it will give him to follow it, but to give unto others, to respect even the least of us so that all of them can be treated as gods should. And Tom Holland gives a great performance too in this role where, he starts the movie as innocent and naive, but having a good heart, and he goes on his own hero's journey where he goes from thinking that his dad is the answer to save Ithaca, that he'll bring him home and everything will be okay, but after what he learns, he realizes that no, he has to be king, and he is able to give Ithaca what it needs. So to me, the beauty of Odysseus' story is that he is a man who has lost faith in humanity, in the gods, and even himself, and as he goes on his trials, he learns to accept what he can't control, and only then is he able to return home and try to set things right. What about the supporting cast, though? I mean, obviously Damon is fantastic. This might be his best role, honestly, but for this story to be as great as it should be, you need all the supporting pieces in place, too. I've already touched on Tom Holland and Anne Hathaway. They both just kill it in their roles. They're both amazing. And I also want to shout out John Bernthal, who I thought was great as Menelaus, as he's just guiding Telemachus on his journey so that he can be king. And I also just loved Robert Pattinson's performance as Antinous. He is just perfectly smarmy, and you can clearly tell that Pattinson was having a lot of fun playing the villain, and he also plays it where he's like just smart enough to be able to get everything that he may want, but as soon as Odysseus is there, he just turns into a spoiled child again who has no idea what to do anymore, as Odysseus just always knows exactly what buttons to push to throw him off his mark. And I also want to give special shout outs to Zendaya and Elliot Page as they play Athena and Sinon, and what really is minor roles. I think combined they're on screen for like 11 minutes, but you always feel their presence and they represent innocence just so well. Which is, of course, ironic because Athena is the god of war, and I think there is a certain beauty in the fact that she represents innocence because, when you're fighting to defend your nation or for freedom, war can be a noble thing, but when you're fighting with hate and you're attacking others, then war is an affront to the gods, and that's why we see the attack on Troy being an attack on Athena as well. And then Sinon is obviously very important to Odysseus. That's why Odysseus uses his name when he's pretending to be a beggar, and why he's the first of the dead to speak to him, because Odysseus is very loyal to his men, and that's why he wants to honor them and welcomes his exile. And of course, the special effects and the score are just fantastic. It brings you into the story with the score, and the special effects never take you out of it, whether it's for the Cyclops or the giants, or, even when the witch is turning Odysseus's men into pigs. I was definitely not expecting it to look that real, and none of it ever takes you out of it. And while that's not my area of expertise, I do know that it kept me in the story, especially considering that I've only seen it once in theaters, haven't been able to pause and really look close at things, but nothing ever takes you out of the story. So what's the verdict? Because this feels like it's the culmination of Christopher Nolan's movies. It's non-linear storytelling like we get in Tenet and Oppenheimer. It's dealing with memory and trying to gain that again, kind of like Memento. It doesn't have a huge twist ending, but just the way everything is being set up and the intimacy of the relationships for the characters feels like it's out of the Prestige. The action is straight out of The Dark Knight. I mean, heck, even sometimes Odysseus feels like a combination of Batman and Oppenheimer, and the ending with our main character going off into the sunset with the woman he loves, it feels like it's this combination of an ending of like The Dark Knight Rises and Inception. I don't say this lightly. I think this is Christopher Nolan's masterpiece, even better than The Dark Knight, and part of the reason why I think that, and this isn't really much of a criticism, and I'm definitely not trying to take anything away from Heath Ledger, but there are times in the story where, for The Dark Knight, the Joker just kind of overshadows the entire story. I mean, sure, part of that is the point, but in the Odyssey, even with a story with gods and monsters, nothing ever feels out of place, nothing ever overshadows it. Heath Ledger probably gave the best performance an actor has ever given in a movie for The Dark Knight, but that's kind of a double-edged sword for it, because sometimes then it overshadows Christian Bale as Batman, or Gary Oldman, or Michael Caine, or Morgan Freeman. It's an amazing cast that, because Ledger dominates the screen so much, I think it's an amazing performance. And if you prefer The Dark Knight still, I get it. I mean, this is definitely me splitting hairs. At the end of the day, The Odyssey and The Dark Knight are both just S-tier movies. The only reason why I'm splitting hairs so much is because I think that these are two of the 3 or 4 greatest movies ever made.
They should have said the poet.
And really, the reason why I would prefer The Odyssey over The Dark Knight is because of its theme. The idea of control versus chaos, which is so prevalent in The Dark Knight, is a great theme, but personally, I just like the idea more of a man who has lost his faith being able to regain it, and not even in a religious sense exclusively. I mean, just losing faith in humanity, losing faith in yourself, and knowing that we can get that faith back to be able to make the world a better place, I think will always be a timeless message, and it's why we've been telling the story of the Odyssey for thousands of years. It's why we'll continue to be telling the story of the Odyssey for thousands of years, and I think Christopher Nolan managed to live up to the expectations that this story would demand, and I think this is the adaptation of the Odyssey and will stand the test of time. But now I want to shift the question to you. What would you rate the Odyssey on a scale of 1 to 100? Personally, I'm looking at these Rotten Tomatoes scores and thinking like, yeah, 95 and 97, they seem about right. No movie can be perfect, but man, does this one come close. And if you enjoyed this review today, I do have a couple others on my channel. You can click on this one here to hear my review of Supergirl, or you can click on this up here and see me rank 35 movies from last year. That was a fun one too. But that's all I got for you today, so drop a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you want more like this, and I'll see you next time on STV.